Good evening. Welcome to Inside News. I am Serena, and this is Monday, October 13th, 2025. Tonight, we bring you the stories that shape our world, from the headlines that dominate to the developments that demand your attention but often escape the spotlight. We begin with a historic day in the Middle East, examine a deepening crisis in Washington, and explore events across continents that carry consequences far beyond their borders. We begin with tonight's major developments. The Gaza conflict reached a turning point today. All 20 remaining living Israeli hostages returned home after more than 2 years in captivity. The release marks the first phase of a ceasefire agreement brokered by President Donald Trump through American and Qatari mediation channels. The first group of 7 hostages crossed into Israel early this morning, followed by the final 13 later in the day. Israeli military personnel transported them to the Reem facility in southern Israel, where medical teams conducted initial assessments before transferring them to Tel Aviv hospitals. Among those freed, Omri Miran, a 48-year-old father, taken from his home in Kibbutz Nahal Oz, and Alon Oel, a 24-year-old pianist, kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival 2 years ago. Israeli President Isaac Herzog personally contacted several freed hostages. He told Oel, known for his musical talent, that the presidential residence piano awaits him. The exchange involved substantial reciprocity. Israel released 250 Palestinian prisoners serving life sentences, along with 1,718 detainees held without charge since the conflict began on October 7, 2023. Buses transporting prisoners to Ramallah in the occupied West Bank and to Gaza, where massive crowds gathered. Palestinian security forces maintained order while medics stood ready. Israeli authorities deployed surveillance drones over release locations, dropping leaflets warning against public displays of support for designated organizations. President Trump arrived in Israel this afternoon and addressed the Knesset. He called the agreement an incredible triumph for Israel and the world, and declared the moment the historic dawn of a new Middle East. His speech emphasized that Israel has won all that can be won by force of arms, and must now translate these victories into the ultimate prize of peace and prosperity for the entire Middle East. Knesset Speaker Amir Ohana introduced Trump as the best friend that Israel ever had in the White House. A significant American delegation attended, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, Senior Advisor Stephen Miller, and Ivanka Trump, whose husband, Jared Kushner, played a central role in negotiating the ceasefire. The diplomatic activity continues tonight in Egypt. Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will join over 20 world leaders at a summit in Sharm el-Sheikh focused on Gaza's future governance. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi extended a personal invitation to Netanyahu during a phone call arranged with Trump. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas will also attend. French President Emmanuel Macron, arriving earlier today, announced France will assume a special role alongside the Palestinian Authority in governing Gaza and has already begun planning operations. Palestinian officials expressed cautious optimism. Adel Attia, director of the European Department at the Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, told reporters that Palestinians welcome the developments, but stressed the need for permanent solutions. He called for implementation of a two-state solution, noting that nearly 160 countries now recognize this framework. We cannot continue negotiating forever, Attia stated. Now it is time to end this cycle of violence by implementation of the two-state solution. That is the only guarantee for the security of Israelis and Palestinians. Turning to the United States, the federal government shutdown has reached its 13th day with no visible resolution. What began on October 1st has devolved into a complete stalemate, affecting millions of Americans and threatening critical government operations. The Senate rejected competing funding proposals for the 7th time on Thursday, before leaving Washington. Lawmakers will not return until Tuesday afternoon. The House remains out of session, with Speaker Mike Johnson canceling votes scheduled for tomorrow. This extends the lower chamber's absence from Washington, which began on September 19th, when the House last voted. The central dispute revolves around competing priorities. Republicans passed a stopgap measure on September 19th that would fund government operations at current levels until November 21st. Senate Democrats refused to advance that bill without simultaneous negotiations on Affordable Care Act subsidies set to expire at the end of the year. Open enrollment begins November 1st, and Democrats argue millions face soaring premiums without immediate action. Republicans insist that Democrats must first provide the votes to reopen the government before any negotiations. The mathematical reality exacerbates the stalemate. Republicans need at least 5 additional Democrats to reach the 60-vote threshold required for passage. Currently, 3 Democrats support the Republican measure. That number has not budged. The human consequences are mounting daily. The Smithsonian Institution closed its 19 museums and the National Zoo on Sunday after exhausting prior year funding reserves. Several airports reported flight delays this week due to air traffic controller shortages. Controllers, categorized as essential workers, continue to work without pay. They will receive back pay once the shutdown ends, but the immediate strain is affecting operations nationwide. Military families face acute distress. Members of the armed forces will miss paychecks due October 15th. Representative Jennifer Kiggins, a Virginia Republican, introduced legislation to pay military personnel, civilian employees, and Department of Defense contractors during funding lapses. The bill has attracted 150 co-sponsors, mostly Republicans. Representative Elise Stefanik of New York broke with Republican leadership on Thursday, publicly demanding a floor vote on military pay. Speaker Johnson is resisting, maintaining that the House fulfilled its responsibility by passing the September stopgap measure 3 weeks ago. A military spouse from Northern Virginia made an emotional plea on C-SPAN on Thursday. Identifying herself as Samantha, she spoke directly to Johnson about her situation. Her husband serves in the Army and suffers from PTSD following 2 deployments to Afghanistan. She has 2 medically fragile children who require regular medication to survive. The family lives paycheck to paycheck, burdened by medical expenses that have depleted their credit. If we see an interruption in pay on October 15th, my children will not receive the medication necessary to live their lives, she stated. My children could die. You could stop this. Johnson listened silently and responded that stories like hers keep him up at night, but he offered no commitment to change course. President Trump addressed the military pay issue on Wednesday, stating, "A week for me is a long time," and promising, "We'll deal with it." No concrete action has followed. The broader legislative timetable reveals systemic failure. Congress must pass 12 annual appropriations bills to fully fund government operations. The House has approved 3. None have passed both chambers. Representative Kevin Kiley, a California Republican, criticized Johnson on Wednesday for keeping the House on an extended recess, while fundamental legislative work remains incomplete. The speaker shouldn't even think about canceling session for a 3rd consecutive week, Kiley wrote. Johnson defended his decision, arguing that appropriations work continues through negotiation and committee deliberation, even without floor votes. Federal agencies are operating with skeleton crews, creating cascading delays in regulatory approvals, permits, and contract processing. The Social Security Administration has curtailed services. Recent polling data from YouGov, conducted October 4th through 6th, shows Trump's approval rating hitting second-term lows among 3 demographics: with the government shutdown cited as a contributing factor. We move now to developments in Lebanon, where tensions persist despite the Gaza ceasefire announcement. Israeli airstrikes hit targets in southern Lebanon on October 11th, killing 1 person and injuring 7. The strikes temporarily shut down a major highway connecting Beirut to the southern regions. Lebanese health ministry officials confirmed the casualties and infrastructure damage. The timing, occurring just before the Gaza hostage release negotiations reach their conclusion, suggests the parallel security concerns Israel maintains regarding its northern border. That concludes our main coverage. Now, stories that require your attention. Now we turn to stories that receive insufficient attention but carry significant consequences. Military developments in Eastern Europe rarely penetrate mainstream media coverage, yet they are shaping the continental security architecture. President Trump issued a warning to Moscow this week regarding potential U.S. military support for Ukraine. The statement specifically mentioned Tomahawk cruise missiles, advanced weapon systems currently prohibited for Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has requested these systems repeatedly throughout the conflict. Defense industry activity reinforces this trajectory. Lockheed Martin, the American aerospace manufacturer, announced plans to produce 400 precision strike missiles annually. These weapons, designated PRSM, serve as a replacement for the ATAMS missile system that the U.S. has provided to Ukraine in limited quantities. The production ramp-up signals a long-term military commitment, regardless of diplomatic developments. Also overlooked in the U.S., a Supreme Court case examining the intersection of professional regulation and constitutional rights. Colorado implemented a sexual orientation and gender identity law 6 years ago, governing the conduct of licensed counselors. The legislation restricts certain therapeutic approaches when counselors work with minor clients. The case before the court questions whether such counseling constitutes protected speech or regulable professional conduct. Justices heard arguments last week. Legal observers note the decision will affect professional licensing standards nationwide, setting a precedent for how states balance practitioners' individual beliefs against client protection statutes. The case has received minimal media attention despite its potential to reshape counseling practice across all 50 states. Environmental threats also warrant greater attention. A powerful storm system is threatening the eastern United States. Meteorologists are tracking its development with concern, noting the potential for significant damage and disruption. The storm's projected path includes densely populated urban corridors from the Mid-Atlantic through New England. Emergency management agencies have issued preparedness advisories, yet public awareness remains limited relative to the storm's potential severity. Continuing in the Asia-Pacific, where international cricket competition unfolds with geopolitical undercurrents often ignored by the general public. The ICC Women's Cricket World Cup features matches that transcend the sport. Today, South Africa faced Bangladesh, with Bangladesh captain Nigar Sultana winning the toss and electing to bat first. These confrontations between nations from different economic and social backgrounds demonstrate how athletic competition creates diplomatic spaces and cultural exchange that formal government channels struggle to replicate. Women's cricket in particular challenges traditional gender restrictions in conservative societies, providing visibility for female athletes in regions where such opportunities remain contested. The ongoing test match between Pakistan and South Africa reveals similar dynamics. Pakistani bowler Noman Ali put his team in a dominant position on day 2. Cricket serves as a primary cultural bridge between South Asian nations and the broader Commonwealth, maintaining connections that political tensions routinely threaten. Pakistan's sporting engagement with South Africa, given both nations' complex historical relationships, with international institutions, creates informal diplomatic channels that operate independently of official foreign policy. India's test series against the West Indies is nearing its conclusion, with India dominating on day 4. The West Indies fought back, but India appears positioned for victory. This series highlights the shifting power structure within international cricket. West Indies cricket, once a dominant force in the sport, now struggles against nations with more substantial financial resources and development infrastructure. This shift mirrors broader patterns of global economic redistribution, where traditional powers decline while emerging economies assert influence through cultural as well as economic channels. Those are the developments from around the world on this Monday, October 13th, 2025. From the historic hostage release in Gaza to the entrenched political crisis in Washington. From overlooked European security decisions to sporting events carrying deeper significance, these stories shape the world we inhabit. At Inside News, we believe every story deserves attention, not just those that generate headlines. The underreported developments often prove the most consequential over time. We remain committed to bringing you both the obvious and the obscure, the celebrated and the neglected. Thank you for joining us tonight. This was Inside News. I am Serena.